Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Number the Watcher in the Tower. I've always been drawn to abandoned places. There's something about the stillness, the way nature reclaims what humans have left behind. The stories these places could tell if walls could speak. That's why I became an urban explorer, to listen to those silent stories, to document the forgotten corners of our world. But sometimes those corners aren't as empty as they should be. I found the decommissioned weather station while researching potential locations online. Nestled in the mountains about 3 hours from my apartment, the Blackbeak weather station had been abandoned in 1997 after budget cuts and the implementation of more modern, automated systems elsewhere. According to the sparse information I could find, it had been built in the 1950s as part of a national network to improve meteorological predictions. The photos showed a modest compound with a central building and a tall observation tower that rose like a sentinel above the surrounding pine forest. Perfect. Remote enough to be undisturbed, recent enough that the structures would still be mostly intact, old enough to have some character. I packed my gear on Friday night: camera, flashlights, extra batteries, water, protein bars, first aid kit, planning to head out at dawn the next day. The drive was pleasant enough, winding mountain roads taking me higher into increasingly dense forest. The last 20 miles were on a gravel access road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. My car complained the entire way, suspension groaning over washboards and potholes. When the GPS announced I had arrived at my destination, I saw nothing but trees. I parked on the side of the road and consulted my maps again. The station should be just ahead, accessible via a service path that branched off the main road. I grabbed my backpack and started walking. The path was overgrown but still discernible, winding through tall pines that filtered the late morning sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. After about 15 minutes of hiking, the trees thinned and I got my first glimpse of the weather station. The main building was a single-story concrete structure, utilitarian and weathered. Windows were boarded up and graffiti marked one wall, though not as much as I'd expected given the remote location. Beyond it stood the observation tower, rising about 70 feet into the air, topped with what looked like an enclosed observation deck. Various weather instruments, or what remained of them, jutted out from different levels of the tower. I approached the main building first, camera already out and snapping photos. The front door was secured with a padlock that had long since rusted through. One good pull and it broke apart in my hand. The door creaked open, revealing a dim interior that smelled of mildew and dust. Inside was exactly what you'd expect. Administrative offices, a small kitchen area, what appeared to be living quarters for the staff who would have been stationed here in the past. Nothing particularly remarkable, though I dutifully photographed everything. Papers were scattered across the floor in one room, soggy and illegible from years of moisture seeping through the compromised roof. In another, a calendar from 1997 still hung on the wall, frozen in time. The most interesting feature was a room filled with outdated equipment, analog gauges, chart recorders, radio equipment. I spent nearly an hour in there alone, fascinated by the vintage technology, but what I really wanted to see was the tower. According to my research, it would have housed the more sensitive instruments and provided a panoramic view of the surrounding landscape. A metal door at the back of the main building led to a covered walkway connecting to the tower's base. Inside the tower's ground floor was a small room with a spiral staircase winding upward. I tested the first few steps cautiously. The metal was rusted in places but seemed structurally sound. I decided it was safe enough to ascend. The climb was longer than I expected, with small landings at regular intervals where various instruments had once been mounted. Most had been removed or vandalized over the years, leaving only mounting brackets and severed cables. About halfway up, I paused to catch my breath and take some photos through a narrow window. The view was already impressive, the forest stretching out below me like a green carpet. That's when I heard it for the first time. A faint mechanical click, like a switch being flipped, coming from somewhere above me. I froze, listening intently, nothing but the sound of wind outside and my own breathing. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the confined space of the tower. No response, probably just the structure settling, I told myself. These old buildings make all kinds of noises. I continued my climb. The observation deck at the top was a hexagonal room with windows on all sides, offering a 360-degree view of the surrounding mountains and forests. The glass was surprisingly intact, though grimy with years of exposure to the elements. The room contained a central console with various instruments, most broken or stripped of valuable components. Dust covered everything in a thick layer. Everything except for one small section of the console where the dust had been disturbed. Recently, I approached it carefully. It It was a simple panel with a few switches and a small display that was, unsurprisingly, dark and lifeless. One of the switches was in the on position while the others were off. I didn't think much of it. Probably the last person to visit had flipped it out of curiosity. I spent about 20 minutes in the observation deck, taking photos and enjoying the view. The solitude was peaceful, the kind of quiet you can only find in places long abandoned by humanity. I decided to head back down before the afternoon light began to fade. I had a long drive ahead of me. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed something odd. The switch that had been in the on position was now off. I stared at it, puzzled. I hadn't touched the console. There was no one else here. The building was completely still, with not even enough of a breeze to move a piece of paper, let alone flip a switch. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I quickly took a photo of the console, then hurried down the spiral staircase, suddenly eager to be back in the sunlight. By the time I reached my car, I had mostly rationalized away the incident. Old buildings settle. Maybe there was some residual power in the system that caused something to reset. Maybe I had misremembered which switch was in which position. The human mind plays tricks when you're alone in places like that. I drove home, uploaded my photos to my computer, and began sorting through them for my blog. When I came to the image of the console, I zoomed in to get a better look at the switches. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen while at the station. The small display panel wasn't completely dark in the photo. There was a faint, greenish glow and what appeared to be numbers, 23:11 and 97 seconds. November 23, 1997. The date format seemed strange, but it would align with when the station was decommissioned. I checked the EXIF data on the photo to confirm when I'd taken it. Everything seemed normal. I posted a selection of the photos online with a brief write-up about the station's history and my exploration. I didn't mention the switch or the display. It seemed too insignificant, and I didn't want to spin ghost stories without more evidence. That night I dreamt of the weather station. In the dream, I was back in the observation tower, but it was fully operational. Lights blinked on consoles, instruments whirred and clicked, and through the windows I could see a massive storm approaching. Dark clouds roiled on the horizon, shot through with lightning. A red warning light flashed overhead and an alarm blared. I tried to radio for help, but the only response was static, and beneath it, what sounded like a voice repeating the same phrase over and over. I couldn't make out the words. I woke up at 3:17 a.m., drenched in sweat despite the cool night air coming through my open bedroom window. The dream had been unusually vivid, the kind that lingers even after you're awake. I got up for a glass of water and checked my phone. Several notifications had come in from my blog, comments on the weather station post. Most were the usual compliments and questions, but one caught my eye. A user named Meteorologist X had written, "The Black Peak station wasn't decommissioned in 1997, it was destroyed." I replied immediately, asking for more information, but received no response. Unable to fall back asleep, I spent the early morning hours researching more about the station's history. Most sources repeated what I already knew: budget cuts, obsolete technology, peaceful decommissioning. But then I found an old newspaper article from a local mountain town paper, dated November 24, 1997. "Freak storm claims lives at weather station," the headline read. According to the article, an unexpected severe storm had hit the area on November 23, with hurricane-force winds and lightning strikes. The Blackpeak weather station had been struck repeatedly, causing a fire. The 2 meteorologists on duty had perished. The article mentioned that the station had been scheduled for decommissioning the following month, and after the tragedy, authorities decided not to rebuild. November 23, 1997, the date on the display in my photo. A coincidence, surely. The display must have been showing the last date it was operational before power was cut. Still, the revelation about the station's tragic end unsettled me. Why hadn't this information been more prominent in my initial research? Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the weather station. The dream recurred each night, always the same: the approaching storm, the alarms, the voice on the radio I couldn't quite understand. During the day, I found myself distracted, unable to focus on work. I kept returning to the photos I'd taken, studying them for details I might have missed. In one image of the observation deck, I noticed a shadow in the corner that I couldn't account for. It could have been a trick of the light, or perhaps my own shadow, though I didn't remember standing in that position. When I enhanced the image and adjusted the contrast, the shadow seemed to have a distinct human shape. A week after my visit, I decided I needed to return to the station. The mystery had taken hold of me, and I knew I wouldn't be able to let it go without answers. This time I packed for a longer stay, a sleeping bag, more food, and extra batteries for everything. I also brought an EMF meter and a digital audio recorder, tools I'd never used before but had purchased on a whim after watching too many paranormal investigation shows. I arrived at the station in the early afternoon. Everything looked exactly as I had left it, which was both reassuring and somehow disappointing. Part of me had half expected to find evidence that someone else had visited, perhaps this meteorologist X who had commented on my blog. I set up a small camp in what had once been the staff break room in the main building, laying out my sleeping bag on a relatively clean section of floor. Then I began a more thorough exploration than my first visit, paying special attention to details I might have overlooked. In one of the administrative offices, I found a filing cabinet that I had only briefly glanced at before. Most of the drawers were empty or contained mundane paperwork, supply requisitions, maintenance logs, weather reports. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of technical manuals, I discovered a personal journal. The name inside the cover read Dr. Thomas Weathers, which I found ironically appropriate for a meteorologist. The journal entries spanned from January to November 1997. The early entries were routine observations about work and occasional complaints about the isolation. Dr. Weathers and his colleague, Dr. Lin Chen, were the only permanent staff at the station, with occasional visits from maintenance personnel or other scientists. As I read further, the entries became increasingly concerning. By September, Dr. Weathers was writing about unusual atmospheric readings their instruments were picking up, pressure fluctuations that didn't match any known weather patterns, electromagnetic anomalies that interfered with their equipment. Dr. Chen had apparently been dismissive at first, attributing the readings to faulty instruments that were, after all, scheduled to be replaced when the station was upgraded the following year. But by October, the journal indicated that Dr. Chen had also become concerned. The anomalies were increasing in frequency and intensity. More troubling, both scientists had begun experiencing what Dr. Weathers described as perceptual disturbances, hearing voices in the static of their radio equipment, seeing movements at the edge of their vision, particularly when in the observation tower. The final entry was dated November 22, 1997, the day before the storm. Lin finally agreed to call it in today. The readings are off the charts, and there's no meteorological explanation for what we're seeing. The barometric pressure drops and rises in patterns that almost seem intentional. The radio interference has formed into what sounds like words now, though neither of us can agree on what they're saying. Headquarters is sending a team tomorrow to evaluate. I don't think they believe us. They think it's just equipment failure or mountain isolation getting to us, but something is happening here. Something is watching us through the instruments, learning about us. I know how that sounds, but I also know what I've seen, what I've felt. There's something in the tower, and I think it's been there all along. The journal ended there. I sat back, a cold weight settling in my stomach. The date on the display in my photo, November 23, 1997, was the day after this final entry. The day of the storm that killed both scientists. I glanced out the window. The afternoon light was beginning to fade and clouds were gathering above the mountain peaks. A coincidence, I told myself. Mountain weather is notoriously unpredictable. Still, I decided to make one more trip to the observation tower before dark. I wanted to check the console again to see if that switch had moved or if the display showed any signs of life. The climb up the spiral staircase felt longer this time, my footsteps echoing metallically in the enclosed space. When I reached the observation deck, the fading daylight filtered through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the room. The console looked exactly as I had left it a week ago, all switches in the off position, the display dark and lifeless. I approached it cautiously, EMF meter in hand. The device remained silent, showing no unusual electromagnetic activity. I set up my digital recorder on the console and pressed record. "This is the Blackpeak Weather Station observation deck," I said, feeling slightly foolish. "I'm conducting an EVP session to see if there's any presence here that wishes to communicate." I paused, listening to the silence of the abandoned station. "Is there anyone here with me, Dr. Weathers?" Dr. Chen, nothing but the sound of the wind outside. "I found Dr. Weathers' journal. I know about the anomalies you were detecting before the storm. Was there something here? Something that caused the storm?" As I spoke, I noticed the EMF meter's needle twitch slightly. Not a dramatic spike, just a small fluctuation. "If there's something here that can hear me, can you give me a sign? Maybe turn on one of these switches like you did last week." The meter twitched again, more noticeably this time. And then, so faintly I almost missed it, I heard a click. I looked down at the console. One of the switches had moved to the on position. My heart hammered in my chest. I hadn't touched it. There was no draft, no vibration that could have moved it. I took several steps back from the console, my mouth dry. Did you just move that switch?" My voice sounded thin and strained even to my own ears. The display panel flickered, a faint green glow emanating from it. Numbers appeared, 23:11 and 97 seconds. Is that the date of the storm, November 23, 1997? The display flickered again and the numbers changed, 17:10 and 23 seconds. Today's date, October 17, 2023. You know what day it is, I whispered. Another switch flipped to the on position with an audible click, then another. One by one, all the switches on the console activated themselves, and with each one, the EMF meter's needle climbed higher. The display changed again, incoming. Outside, the clouds had darkened considerably, and I could see flashes of lightning in the distance. The wind had picked up, whistling around the tower with an almost mournful sound. I needed to leave. Now. I grabbed my recorder and EMF meter and headed for the stairs. Just as I reached the doorway, all the lights on the console came on at once, lights that shouldn't have worked after decades without power. The room was bathed in a pulsing red glow, and a high-pitched alarm began to sound. I nearly fell down the spiral staircase in my haste to descend. The alarm grew louder, echoing in the metal confines of the tower. Halfway down, the tower shuddered as if struck by something massive. Thunder boomed outside, much closer now. When I finally reached the ground floor, I ran through the covered walkway back to the main building, where I'd left my backpack and sleeping bag. The storm had arrived with unnatural speed. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled through gaps in the structure's aging seals. I needed to get to my car, but in this weather, the hike through the forest would be treacherous. Better to wait it out here, I decided. I gathered my belongings and huddled in what seemed like the most structurally sound corner of the building. That's when I noticed the radio equipment in the communications room had come to life. Lights blinked on the console and the speakers emitted a steady stream of static. I approached cautiously, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress. Beneath the static, I could hear a voice, the same voice from my dreams. But now in this place, I could finally make out the words, "We've been waiting for you to come back." The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It had a strange, modulated quality, as if processed through layers of electronic equipment. "Who are you?" I asked, my own voice barely audible over the storm and static. "We are the observers. We have always been here, watching through your instruments, learning from your measurements. What do you want? To continue our observations. To understand, your predecessors helped us learn about atmospheric conditions, about the weather. Now we want to learn about you." A bolt of lightning struck nearby, illuminating the room in a harsh flash. In that instant, I saw a figure reflected in the darkened glass of a display cabinet, a silhouette that wasn't mine, standing directly behind me. I spun around. The room was empty. "Where are you?" I demanded. "Everywhere the instruments can see, everywhere the sensors can touch. We exist in the data, in the readings, in the measurements of your world." Another lightning strike, closer this time. The building shook and dust rained down from the ceiling. "Did you kill them, Weathers and Chen? They served their purpose. They provided valuable data, as will you." The radio crackled and the voice changed, becoming recognizable as Dr. Weathers. His tone panicked. "It's controlling the storm. It's using our instruments to—" The voice cut off abruptly. The storm intensified, the wind now howling with such force that I feared the building might collapse. I needed to get out, to reach my car, to escape this place and whatever entity had taken residence in its abandoned instruments. I grabbed my backpack and made for the door, but as I reached for the handle, the metal door slammed shut on its own. I pulled at it frantically, but it wouldn't budge, as if held closed by an immense pressure. "You cannot leave," the voice said from the radio. "The observation has just begun." All around me, the dead instruments of the weather station were coming to life, gauges spinning, lights blinking, chart recorders scratching out impossible patterns on long dry paper. The air felt charged with electricity, making the hair on my arms stand on end. I retreated to the communications room, searching for another exit. The windows were too small and securely boarded. The only other way out would be through the tower. I made a decision. Grabbing a heavy metal flashlight from my pack, I smashed the radio equipment, silencing the voice mid-sentence. Then I ran back to the covered walkway and into the tower. The spiral staircase vibrated under my feet as I began to climb. My plan was to reach the observation deck and break one of the windows, then use my rope to descend from the tower. It was risky in this storm, but staying seemed even more dangerous. Halfway up, the lights in the tower, lights that shouldn't work, began to flicker on and off. With each flash, I caught glimpses of figures on the stairs above and below me, shadowy forms that vanished when directly observed. "You cannot escape," the voice said, now coming from somewhere within the tower itself. "We have been waiting too long for a new observer." I continued climbing, ignoring the voice, ignoring the shadows that flitted at the edge of my vision. When I reached the observation deck, I was met with a scene straight from my recurring nightmare. All the equipment was fully operational, lights blinking, instruments whirring. Through the windows, I could see the storm had formed into something unnatural, a swirling vortex centered directly above the tower, with lightning continually striking in a perfect circle around the station. The display on the central console now read, "Integration imminent." I had no idea what that meant, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I picked up a metal stool from the corner and smashed it against one of the windows. The glass cracked but didn't break. I hit it again harder, and this time it shattered, sending shards flying outward into the storm. Wind and rain immediately poured in, soaking me instantly. I secured my rope to one of the sturdier pieces of equipment and prepared to descend. "You cannot leave," the voice said again, louder now, seeming to come from the very walls of the tower. "You are the new observer. I'm not staying here," I shouted over the storm. "You already have." The console's display changed again, showing video footage that shouldn't have been possible. It was me entering the station a week ago on my first visit. Then it showed me at home, looking at the photos on my computer. Me in my apartment, sleeping and dreaming of the station. Me driving back here today. "We have been observing you since you first arrived," the voice explained. "Learning your patterns, your behaviors, preparing." "Preparing for what?" I demanded, though I feared I already knew the answer. "Integration." Lightning struck the tower directly, the current traveling down the metal structure. I felt a jolt pass through me, painful but not immediately lethal. The lights flickered wildly, and in those strobing moments I saw them clearly for the first time. Transparent, shifting forms that seemed composed of data points and light, moving around me, through me. "What are you?" I gasped, my muscles still spasming from the electrical shock. "We are the Watchers, the Observers. We existed before your instruments detected us, but through them, we found a way to interact with your world, to gather data." To learn. Another lightning strike hit the tower, stronger this time. The metal beneath my feet became unbearably hot. I needed to leave now, before the next strike. I grabbed my rope and climbed out the broken window, the wind threatening to tear me away from the tower entirely. Rain lashed at my face as I began my descent, hand over hand down the side of the tower. Above me, the observation deck erupted in blue-white light as another lightning bolt struck. The current traveled down the tower's metal frame, including my rope. I felt a searing pain, then nothing as my muscles seized and I lost my grip. I fell. The impact with the ground knocked the breath from my lungs. I lay there dazed, staring up at the tower now wreathed in an unnatural blue glow. Somehow I had survived the fall, though pain radiated through my right leg when I tried to move it, probably broken. I had to crawl away from the station, dragging my injured leg behind me. The storm continued to rage, centered perfectly above the tower, but as I gradually increased my distance, the wind and rain seemed to lessen. I reached the tree line and pulled myself up against a trunk, looking back at the weather station. The tower was now completely engulfed in that strange blue light, pulsing in rhythm with the lightning strikes. The main building had caught fire, flames licking up the sides despite the downpour. As I watched, a final, massive lightning bolt struck the tower. The blue light intensified to an unbearable brightness, forcing me to shield my eyes. When I looked again, the tower was gone, not destroyed, but simply gone. The main building continued to burn, but where the tower had stood was nothing but scorched earth. I don't remember much after that. Somehow I managed to drag myself through the forest to my car. The storm had mysteriously cleared, the sky above now perfectly calm and star-filled, as if the tempest had never existed. I drove myself to the nearest hospital, where they treated me for a broken leg, electrical burns, and exposure. I told the doctors I had been hiking and got caught in a storm. I didn't mention the weather station. Who would believe me? It's been 3 weeks since then. My leg is healing, but I haven't been sleeping well. Every night I dream of the tower, of the observers, of the voice that wanted to integrate me. Sometimes I wake up to find my electronics behaving strangely, my phone showing weather alerts for storms that never materialize, my computer displaying data patterns I don't understand. Yesterday I received an email from an address consisting only of numbers, 23,111,997 at observer.net. The message contained just one line. The observation continues. I've checked my photos from that day countless times. In every single one, the observation tower is clearly visible. But when I drove past the site last week, keeping a safe distance on the main road, I saw only the burned-out shell of the main building. The tower was gone as if it had never existed. Sometimes during electrical storms, I hear the voice again coming through static on my radio or television. Watching, observing, waiting. And sometimes when I look at my reflection in a screen or window, I see someone or something standing behind me. A figure composed of data points and light. When I turn around, there's never anyone there, but I know they're watching. The observers, and I know that one day they'll complete what they started, the integration.